And welcome back to the Afrolit Digital Den, where we are taking time out of our busy schedules and our days to read the seminal work of great African thinkers and African philosophers that will help free our decolonized mind. And we left off in Chinwezu's Part 1, Economics. In the previous section, we took a look at the making of an industrial culture. And if you've read any of the other works of these great African thinkers, you'll understand the importance of culture. Not just culture linked to one's Africanity or Eurocentricity, but culture in general, really. Culture is the tools that we use to help us solve problems. At least that's how Dr. Amos Wilson stated it. And so these two approaches were used. We have the capitalist approach versus the communist approach. These recipes were used to industrialize nations, two separate nations. And we saw how a culture had to be created to do that. So Amos Wilson said culture is problem solving tools, right? So these countries put in place these 9 elements to create this industrial culture to get the outcome that it was striving for. And so there's a lesson to be learned there. I think that's what Chinwezu is showing us, is that as Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, we need to come together and create a culture of liberation, understanding what went into place to industrialize these countries. We can learn from that, create a culture that will not only liberate us and industrialize us, but revolutionize us, right? Totally transform the situation from the way that it currently is. And we don't need to use European values to get at that, to be able to do that. So in this segment of the readings, we're looking at economic development in ambiguous misnomer. And as we were going through and reading different parts of the book, just in case you don't know, my background is I'm a reading specialist. And so when I teach students how to read, I've taught students from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade. I've taught them reading strategies. So some of the things that you'll see me do here is that I'll model certain strategies that I want my students to practice. So say, for example, I want them to understand the meaning of a word, and I'm looking at the word coffer, and I'm not sure what that word means. So I will have them use their devices and go online and let's look up coffer. Now, one of my favorite tools is vocabulary.com. So here they say a coffer is a small safe or lockbox that's meant for keeping precious or valuable items safe. So here we have the emerging robber barons with the complicity of politicians. So the politicians complied and allowed it, looted the land and the state's coffers. And here we have the prince of these robber barons, which included Rockefeller, right? So let's look at what a robber baron is. And it says a person who has become rich through ruthless and unscrupulous business practices. So that's how they got all their money. And what's interesting is that we're taught to value these people, to praise these people. We're told that, hard work pays off. And it's like, there was no hard work. These people looted, these people stole, they did ruthless things to get their wealth. And I'm supposed to admire that, right? Well, Dr. Obitashaka Wonderful, wonderful man, has a YouTube channel where he comes on and he does great teaching, great lecturing. And one thing that he talked about was this Aryan culture. And these Aryans really are ruthless in their nature and their values. Um, and I link it to something that I read in Dr. Jacob Carruthers' work, um, intellectual, what is it called? Tyranny, intellectual tyranny. I believe that's the name of the book. Where Dr. Jacob Carruthers also said that all these people want to do is take from others and then enslave them and make them work. It's like they don't like to work. So when I get a moment, I'm going to pull up Jacob Carruthers' writing on that and make that connection because it's all related. You know, they steal, they lie, they cheat, and then they'll have you thinking that you are the one that's not good enough, where you don't believe in stealing, looting, taking from others to gain your wealth. You believe in God-given wealth because God is the provider, right? And I'm using God, very loosely, um, because it's not the European God that I'm referring to. I'm referring to the Almighty. Um, so anyway, I went off on a tangent, but in this segment, we're looking at economic development in ambiguous misnomer. So, the reason why I was going off on a tangent is because I wanted you to see some of the reading strategies that I use with students. I've even worked with students who are studying for their GED. And so I'll show them different strategies that they can use as they're reading these passages and trying to answer questions about the passages. The goal here is to use powerful literature, to use authentic text that's going to really help us solve our own problems, right? The stuff that they give us to read in school, these passages that they give us to read on the SAT or these other mandated tests, it's nothing that's going to help liberate the mind. So I'm replacing those Eurocentric pieces with Afrocentric pieces, pieces that are powerful to get you to think, that will still equip you with those skills that you can pass state tests. But I'm replacing that knowledge with knowledge that's real, that's going to get us to our goal. Okay, so now we're looking at this section right here, and I'll start reading. And it says the conventional term economic development is an ambiguous misnomer. Now, that's interesting how he says this. So, we have this conventional term here that we all kind of use and throw around, economic development. Is an ambiguous, so ambiguous is like unclear, confusing, misnomer, meaning it's mislabeled. I don't even think that's the right term, right? So here's what I would do. I would say, okay, students, let's look up the word ambiguous. Okay, so we find ambiguous and it says open to more than one interpretation, having a double meaning, unclear, or inexact, between a choice between alternatives has not been made. Okay, so here they're saying that it is open to more than one interpretation, having a double meaning. Okay, so what I would tell my students is, okay, let's write that definition on top. So let's say having a double meaning. Now that in and of itself says a lot, right? And then let's pull up this word. What is a misnomer? Now, sometimes me personally, when I am reading, I'll think that I know the meaning of a word when I really don't. So when we look up misnomer, it says a wrong or inaccurate name or designation. So then I'll say, okay, so that is a wrong inaccurate, make sure I spell that right, name or designation. Designation. Now, sometimes you will not have room in between to write, so then I'll tell the students to write in the margins. Okay. All right. So now let's continue here. It is used for two quite dissimilar processes. Oh, so it's not even similar, they're dissimilar. Okay. The indulgence in cargo cult consumerism, okay, and we read about that earlier, and the creation of industrial culture. Okay, so they're not similar in their nature at all because on the one hand, we want all this material stuff that we're not getting. Then on the other hand, we have to have this industrial culture that requires those 9 characteristics. So let's see what he says. Neither process is, strictly speaking, economic. So neither process is economic, each being cultural in the broadest functional sense of that term. So each being cultural. So we have the cargo cult, and I could see him saying that being cultural because the word cult is linked to culture. Okay, and then we have industrial culture. So each being cultural in the broadest functional sense of that term. Okay, I could see that. The ambiguity and the misnomer are harmful. The tragedy of the ambiguity is that the cargo cult maldevelopment is carried on under the illusion that an industrial culture is being created. As for the misnomer, to the extent that it narrows attention to factors purely economic, it is like an incomplete recipe. No matter how long you boil water alone, you can't produce pepper soup. It is therefore useful to remove the ambiguity and to avoid the misnomer by speaking not of economic development in general, but either of cargo cult maldevelopment or of the creation of industrial culture. We might, for short, speak of maldevelopment and development so long as we know what each denotes. Okay, so he's going to break it down maldevelopment versus development. Now, I always tell my students before we move on, let's make sure that we pretty much understand what's happening here. So, we have this economic development being the wrong term and being inaccurate, having a double meaning. And he's saying the ambiguity and the misnomer are harmful. Wow, this could be an answer to, why we are struggling as Africans. Okay, so let's put a star there. That it's harmful. So the tragedy of the ambiguity, so the tragedy of having this double meaning in economic development is that the cargo cult maldevelopment is carried on under the illusion. Okay, so we have this maldevelopment that's happening under this illusion that an industrial culture is being created. And I could see how that could be an illusion because remember earlier, he alluded to that. Let's see here. Okay, so here he said, we have infrastructure building and foreign investment. So these bringers of consumer goods is, bringing in these various physical infrastructures and these buildings, these highways, airports, telecommunication systems, warehouses, assembly plants, turnkey factories, industrial parks, universities, think tanks. So it's like, okay, so it looks like we're getting all of this, but we're not getting it all, right? And so he says it's pretty much an illusion that an industrial culture is being created. Hmm. As for the misnomer, so I really like how he breaks it down because he's saying, okay, the tragedy of ambiguity. So he starts by giving you his reasoning there, and then as for the misnomer, why it is misnamed or misdesignated, to the extent that it narrows attention. Oh, and so do you see why it's important for us to read things more than once? Because we read it through and we thought we had an understanding, but when you go back and reread, you realize, oh, wait, I totally missed that. So, as for the misnomer, to the extent that it narrows attention to factors purely economic, it is like an incomplete recipe. Hmm. So, this economic development has double meaning and is actually misdesignated. So it gives you an incomplete recipe. Because remember earlier we said the recipe was either capitalism, communist. Those were the sample recipes. But that is not the only thing that we have to subscribe to. But that's what the Europeans have presented to us. And if you know anything about their way of thinking, if you read Urugu, you realize that they are very surface. They're not as deep as they think they are. So we have an incomplete recipe here. Let's highlight that. So no matter how long you boil water alone, I love his analogies. You can't produce pepper soup, right? You're just going to end up with hot water. It is therefore useful to remove the ambiguity and to avoid the misnomer by speaking not of economic development in general, but either of cargo cult maldevelopment. So you got to unpack these terms here. Are you talking about the cargo cult maldevelopment that's happening, or of the creation of industrial culture that has those 9 characteristics? Okay, so now he's going to go into maldevelopment versus development. The creation of a national industrial culture contrasts profoundly with cargo cult maldevelopment in objectives, priorities, approaches, as well as in the type of leadership they require. Okay, so that's important here. So, the creation of a national industrial culture, and that's kind of like what he talked about earlier, contrasts. So it goes against profoundly the cargo cult maldevelopment and objectives. So if we're developing a national industrial culture, then this cargo cult maldevelopment has different objectives, it has different priorities, it has different approaches, as well as in the type of leadership they require. So a different leadership type. So the creation of a national industrial culture. Okay, so what the US did, what the USSR did, is totally opposite from the cargo cult maldevelopment that's happening right now. In developing countries, those which are genuinely creating a national industrial culture. Okay, so now I like how he's defining it. So, developing countries are those which are genuinely creating a national industrial culture. So, they're genuinely using those 9 characteristics to create this industrial culture. Production holds preeminence over consumption. So, it's very interesting that in the USA, um, people who check off Black or African American have been designated to consumers. We get less access to the production. And when we are able to produce, it's more in the entertainment. Um, I'm thinking about fully, is it fully? Oh gosh. Neely Fuller, I think that's his name. He has these 9 areas of social life that's impacted by racism. And I think he says education, entertainment, sex, war. Oh gosh, so they're not all coming to me, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that we have these developing countries, those which are generally creating a national industrial culture. So he's not calling it third world. He's saying truly developing countries have these pieces. Production holds preeminence over consumption. And then I liken that to here in the US, where we're so called developed. Uh, a lot of the minoritized people have been relegated to the consumption end. Okay. The accumulation of capital for local productive investment is a national habit, and the development of consumerism is discouraged. Look at that. The development of consumerism is discouraged or even suppressed. And see, here they really encourage us to go out and buy, till after an industrial productive capacity has been properly installed. Even when such countries have finally given way to consumerism, they still make sure that they produced most of what they consume, and that imports of finished goods stay marginal to their economy. Okay, so remember earlier how we read something to really get a deeper understanding. So even when such countries, so we're talking about these developing countries, these legitimate developing countries, not these pseudo developing countries, even when such countries have finally given way to consumerism. And what came to my mind is a country like China, who shut its doors down, just re-socialized everyone, mobilized everyone to just kind of remake itself before it reopened back up to the world. And even when such countries have finally given way to consumerism, so now I believe they open themselves up to consumerism, they still make sure that they produce most of what they consume. So whatever they're making, their people are consuming it. And that imports of finished goods stay marginal to their economy, whereas in the US, we pretty much get everything from China, right? In contrast, in maldeveloping countries, okay, so here we got some African countries that we can put into this category. In maldeveloping countries, those which practice cargo cult maldevelopment, most of what is consumed is imported. And that made me think of even the secondhand items that we so called donate to help, which they're not being donated, they're actually being sold. So you are donating a shirt or a pair of pants that you think is going to be helping some person who can't, afford a shirt or pants, when reality is you're not. Because those secondhand items are actually being resold. That was a big eye opener for me when I went to Africa and discovered that. So, in contrast, in maldeveloping countries, most of what is consumed is imported. In fact, cargo cult maldevelopment is characterized by the development of consumerism without the prior development of the industrial culture, which could produce consumer goods. By putting the cart of consumerism before the horse of productivity, cargo cult maldevelopment becomes antagonistic to the accumulation of capital, whether by private or state organizations, for local productive investment. Therefore, no matter how intensively or for how long maldevelopment is pursued, it cannot create a national industrial culture. After all, no matter how long a turkey is nurtured, it cannot become an elephant. which is why in both its capitalist and socialist versions, cargo cult maldevelopment has failed and shall continue to fail to create industrial culture and society. Because when you think about that story where these Melanesian people are waiting on this magical God to bring these goods, they don't understand production. And when I say they, I'm referring to myself because I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that whole miseducated population. Examples from countries where it was accomplished show that development proceeds from a self reliant understanding of the nation's history and circumstances and interprets for local practice whatever general economic and political theories the leadership of the nation chooses to be guided by. Hmm. So, examples from countries where it was accomplished show that development proceeds, so true development proceeds from a self reliant understanding of the nation's history and circumstances. So you have to know your history. And that's one thing that they have really worked hard on is to remove the history, that we lose our historical consciousness, and we have a God-given right to our historical consciousness. So we have to understand the history and circumstances and interprets for local practice whatever general economic and political theories the leadership of the nation chooses to be guided by. Mm. So maldevelopment, okay, so here we have development, so let's underline that, and then we have maldevelopment in contrast, and let's do that in a different color so that we can see the contrast. And there's some folks that says, oh, highlighting is not necessary, it does not help with learning. I beg to differ. Highlighting helps you to visually organize information, right? Especially when you have a sea of text. The highlighting helps you to see how the ideas are related in the piece. So we have development on the one hand, then maldevelopment in contrast proceeds from a happy ignorance. Here we got proceeds from a self reliant understanding. Here we got a happy ignorance or misunderstanding of the nation's history and condition. Oh, wow. I don't know if it's a happy ignorance. Maybe it is because some people don't want to face the truth. Some people are very comfortable with things. So they're happily ignorant. And I guess I could say I was one of those people. I was a happy, ignorant uh, African female who really did not care about the history. But now that I'm coming into my consciousness, I'm realizing no, you need to know this history and you need to teach it to the youngsters. They need to know. So we have a misunderstanding. I also had misunderstandings, and it's a result of the lies. We've been told so many lies that contributes to the misunderstanding. And then he says here, and the leadership often dragoons the nation into a religious worship of whatever economic and political theory it subscribes to, instead of adapting such theory to serve the nation. Theory becomes theology by being applied dogmatically instead of scientifically. Oh my gosh. I don't know what to say to that because that is powerful, right? Instead of using theory, okay, you're using theology. You're using uh, what you believe about this God. I don't even know if it's a false God or what have you, but the leadership often dragoons. So this is new for me. So, what I would tell my students is, okay, let's look that up. Okay, so let's look up dragoon. Okay, let's look up the definition here. And it says a member of any of several cavalry regiments in the British Army. Okay, but that's the noun version of it. So it says the leadership often dragoons, which is action. So let's look at the verb version of it. Coerce someone into doing something. Oh, okay. So we got coerce. So I will tell my students, okay, let's write that meaning above it. So we have here coerce someone into doing something. Okay. So the leadership coerces or pressures the nation into a religious worship. Oh, whether it's Arabized or Europeanized, some type of religious worship of whatever economic and political theory it subscribes to. So if you're Christian, oh, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth, or whatever. Or if you're Muslim, I don't know about Islamic perspectives when it comes to um, economic and political theory. But we know that Christendom is a political tool used to control millions, if not billions, of Africans, and same with Islam. So within Christendom, it has economic and political theory that is being taught through the Bible, the sacred text. And so instead of adopting such theory to serve the nation, let's see, let's scratch that. Okay. So a religious worship of whatever economic and political theory it subscribes to, instead of adapting such theory to serve the nation. Interesting. So instead of adapting that theory to help improve the nation, they're using it to coerce people. And then it says the theory becomes theology by being applied dogmatically instead of scientifically. So we are like forcing you to apply this theory. Now, the other piece that I wanted us to look at is the definition of theory, because theory is so confusing. It's another term that's ambiguous because there's meanings that can be assigned to it. So here they say a theory is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. And it's like, oh, okay. What did it just say? So here's another definition. A theory is a rational type of abstract thinking about a phenomenon or the results of such thinking. Now, when we come back at our next session, I'm going to give you Dr. Jeffrey's definition of theory, and I'm going to give you Amos Wilson's definition of theory. Because we do need theory, but it has to be applied scientifically. Theory is not truth. Theory is applying a system of ideas in order to be able to predict something, right? So let's continue. Development requires a leadership cadre or class which is clear-sightedly dedicated to the transformation of its society, which is willing and has the confidence to face the challenges of that social adventure, and which is undaunted by the price that must be paid. Remember, we saw the price earlier that was paid by USA and USSR with regards to the civil wars and the political unrest or upheavals. So, yeah, I mean, revolution doesn't come easy and it's not free, right? So it says right here, in contrast, leaders of maldevelopment usually either mistake it for development or are unwilling to face the challenges and risks of development or are scared off by the price it exacts. They demand the fruits of development but insist on avoiding its cost in social and personal discipline, deferred consumption, investment, talent, effort, and the dislocation or abandonment of some old ways and cherished values. It is as if, as the saying goes, they want to go to paradise but do not want to die. Another contrast between the two types of leadership is in their attitude to their predecessors in development. In their day as developing nations, the USA, USSR, and Japan regarded their European predecessors as models to be surpassed at their own game. Third world maldevelopers, however, see the advanced industrial countries not as pace setters whose challenge must be sportingly met, but as fairy godfathers from whom cargoes of industrial products are to be begged or demanded, godfathers who are to be damned as demons should they fail to hand over the goods. Mm, wow. Every time I read sections of Chinwezu's work, it just leaves me speechless because it really leaves your mind uh, open to question. You've always heard, people saying, "Oh, it's our leaders, the African leaders. They are terrible." But there's more to it, right? We have over here where he talked about leadership. So the leaders usually either mistake it for development or are unwilling to face the challenges. So the leaders that did face the challenge, a lot of them lost their lives. So it's scary. They demand the fruits of development, but insist on avoiding its costs. It may require blood to be shed. And sometimes I stop and think, I'm like, is this something that I want to die for, right? It's a sacrifice that we really need to think about because if if we don't really take this seriously, like John Henrik Clark said, we will perish. Like we don't have any friends. No one is our friends. So we have to come to this realization that we have to wake up and save ourselves. Mm. And let's see here. So we have a list here. The fruits of development, but insist on avoiding its cost in social and personal discipline, right? So we have social and personal discipline. Because if you are allowing materialism to drive your values, then of course you're not going to have any social or personal discipline because you want to show off your Mercedes Benz or you want to show off the big house, right? So deferred consumption, deferred investment, then we have talent, effort, and the dislocation or abandonment of some old ways and cherished values. So, some of these old ways that we've set up, these values that we've cherished, that we've inherited from the West, it's like, I don't know if I'm ready to give that up yet, right? And he says another contrast between the two types of leadership is in their attitude to their predecessors in development. Okay, so here we got USA, USSR, and Japan regarded their European predecessors as models to be surpassed. So we're going to do bigger and better, right? Whereas third world maldevelopers see the advanced industrial countries not as pace setters whose challenge must be sportingly met, but as fairy godfathers. Oh my gosh. So that's where that Magiccio or Magico. I need to see how I pronounce that. That's where that magico slash religious magic piece comes in, because I can't think of another word. But this is where the mysticism and the um, that piece where you just want a handout. It's like it's linked to the dependency theory. Okay, so I have this dependency mindset, and then my fairy godfather, from whom cargoes of industrial products are to be begged or demanded. Please let me have your foreign cars. Let me have your foreign phones, your foreign computers. Um, I was over in Tanzania and we were in the car going someplace, and I remember driving past a store that said American stuff. So it's like, we want your American stuff, right? And then if you look closely, it's made in China. And then it says, Godfathers who are to be damned as demons should they fail to hand over the goods. When do we get tired of that? When are we going to break ourselves away from that? They are not our godfathers. They are not our godmothers. They are not our friends. They are taking our natural resources and producing them wherever they produce them and then resell it back to us. That's maldevelopment. And so I really appreciate Chinwezu's explanation of this. All right, so we're going to stop here. We went a little bit over today, but that's okay because we are learning a lot. See you in the next reading.